The ocean had a rule older than language, older than memory, older even than fear itself. A rule written not in words but in instinct, etched into every living thing that ever swam beneath the waves. When blood enters the water, the sharks circle. And that was why the alien wardens were smiling as they stood on the outer edge of the floating prison ring, looking down at the endless dark blue expanse below them, confident in the law they believed could never be broken, confident that the ocean would always behave the way it was supposed to. The prison floated alone in the middle of a planet-wide sea, a massive circular platform of black metal suspended above the water by humming anti-gravity pylons, its underside vanishing into mist and spray, its surface crowded with human prisoners who had long since learned there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, because the ocean itself was the wall. There were no bars, no cells, no fences, only open air, salt wind, and water stretching to the horizon in every direction. And beneath that water swam the Warden's ultimate threat: sharks, altered and enhanced by alien science, larger than any Earth species, faster, smarter, their bodies traced with faint bioluminescent lines and cold metal implants fused to bone and muscle, living weapons designed to patrol the depths below the platform and tear apart anything that dared enter the sea. For months, the Wardens had relied on a simple truth: humans feared sharks, and sharks obeyed hunger, and hunger was something the Wardens could control. Any escape attempt ended the same way: splash, scream, red water, and then silence. The lesson had been learned quickly. The humans stayed on the platform, the sharks stayed below. Order was maintained. That was why, when the plasma lance fired and struck the water with a sharp hiss of superheated energy, when steam exploded upward and a small broken shape sank beneath the surface, trailing a thin ribbon of blood, the Wardens leaned forward eagerly, their many eyes fixed on the place where the blood had entered the sea, waiting for the moment they knew was coming. Blood drifted through the water, warm and unmistakable, dispersing in slow, blooming tendrils that curled and twisted like smoke beneath the surface, and the humans froze, every breath caught in their throats, because they knew the rule too. They had grown up with it, had been taught it since childhood through documentaries and warnings and whispered stories. Blood meant movement, blood meant teeth, blood meant death. Somewhere behind the Wardens, a sensor chimed softly, confirming what everyone could already see. Organic fluid detected, fresh, high protein, the kind that always triggered a feeding response. The Wardens smiled wider. They waited for the water to churn, for the sleek shapes to rise from the depths, for dorsal fins to cut the surface in widening circles. Seconds passed, then more. The ocean remained calm, too calm. The blood continued to spread, thinning as it mixed with the vastness of the sea, but there was no sudden acceleration of movement below, no tightening spiral, no flash of pale underbellies twisting upward. The sharks were not circling. The Wardens exchanged confused glances, checking their monitors, adjusting their scanners, certain that something must be wrong with the readings, because nature did not hesitate, predators did not ignore blood, and weapons did not disobey commands. Beneath the platform, the sharks were visible only as faint glimmers of light far below, their bioluminescent veins dimming instead of brightening, their massive bodies not rising, but sinking, descending slowly and deliberately into darker, colder water, as if retreating rather than advancing. A strange silence settled over the prison ring, heavier than the screams that usually followed such displays, a silence broken only by the low hum of the pylons and the distant cry of wind over metal. The humans did not cheer, they did not move, they simply stared at the water, their expressions shifting from terror to something else. Confusion, yes, but also recognition, as if they were witnessing something deeply wrong in a way that went beyond fear. The Warden's smiles faded. One of them barked an order, commanding the sharks to return to patrol depth, to engage, to feed. But the water did not respond, and the implants embedded in the predator's skulls sparked faintly before going dark, overwhelmed by a current that had not been there moments before.
The ocean itself seemed to breathe, a subtle rise and fall that had nothing to do with waves, and for the first time since the prison had been built, the Wardens felt it, a sensation they had never experienced on any conquered world, a feeling of being observed, not by eyes, but by something vast and indifferent that did not care for their rules. On the edge of the platform, a small human boy stood very still, his feet bare against the cold metal, his gaze fixed on the place where the blood had entered the sea, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the translators almost missed it, but the words carried anyway, carried across the ring and down into the water, like a signal sent through bone and salt. "You broke the agreement," he said, not in anger, not in fear, but with the calm certainty of someone stating a fact that could not be argued. The Wardens turned toward him, ready to laugh, ready to dismiss the sound as meaningless noise from a weak creature, but something stopped them, something in the way the water continued to darken below, not with movement, but with depth, as if the sea itself were drawing inward, gathering attention, focusing. The sharks did not return. They vanished into the abyss as one, and in that moment, as the blood thinned and disappeared, the Wardens realized the rule they trusted had not failed. It had been replaced. The first thing the prisoners noticed was not the pain, not the burning sting where flesh met energy, or the sharp shock that raced through nerves when the plasma struck the water, but the silence that followed, a silence so sudden and complete that it felt heavier than any scream ever could, because there was no cry of panic, no splash of bodies thrashing beneath the surface, no frantic eruption of movement from the depths below the prison ring, only the low, constant hum of alien machinery and the whisper of wind sliding across metal. And in that unnatural quiet, every human instinct began to ache with the same question at once, the same thought that had been carved into human memory for thousands of years by oceans, documentaries, myths, and fear itself. Where are the sharks? The floating prison platform hung above the endless sea like a dark halo, its circular frame casting a long shadow over the water, and above it hovered the alien command ring, a slow spinning crown of light and armor, where the Wardens stood watching, their many eyes fixed on the place where blood had entered the ocean, because their instruments were already confirming what everyone could see with their own eyes, organic fluid dispersing outward in soft red plumes, warm, fresh, unmistakably human, spreading through the water in delicate tendrils that curled and twisted like smoke beneath the surface, and by every law the aliens believed governed nature, by every simulation and controlled test they had ever run, this was the moment when the sea should have answered. The Wardens leaned forward slightly, anticipation rippling through them, expecting the surface below to break, expecting dorsal fins to slice upward, expecting the elegant violence they had come to rely on as the ultimate deterrent, because this was how order was maintained on the ocean prison. The humans feared the water, and the water obeyed hunger. Seconds passed, stretching long enough for breath to return to human lungs, long enough for terror to transform into something sharper and more focused, because nothing happened, no ripples spread outward, no dark shapes surged upward from below the prison ring, and the water remained smooth, except for the gentle disturbance of wind, its surface reflecting the alien lights above like a cold, unblinking eye. The Wardens checked their displays, fingers tapping controls, adjusting filters, increasing sensitivity, because the sensors did not lie. Biological markers were present, protein density was high, temperature gradients were ideal, and yet beneath the surface, the sentry sharks were not rising, not accelerating, not responding at all, their bioluminescent signatures faint and distant, scattered far below the platform instead of converging towards the source of blood as they always had before. A murmur passed through the alien observers, irritation creeping into their voices, because predators did not ignore food, and weapons did not hesitate, and somewhere among the human prisoners, a quiet understanding began to form, a subtle shift in posture, in breath, in the way eyes stopped darting wildly, and instead fixed on the water with a strange dawning focus, as if they too were listening for something deeper than sound. The blood continued to disperse, thinning as the vastness of the ocean swallowed it, and still the sharks did not circle, and the longer the silence stretched, the more it felt wrong, not just unexpected, but fundamentally incorrect, like a sentence spoken with the wrong ending, because the humans knew this rule as well as the aliens did, knew it in their bones, had carried it across generations. Blood means movement, blood means teeth, blood means death. And yet the sea remained calm, almost respectful, as if holding itself still. One of the wardens issued a sharp command, transmitted through the implants embedded deep within the shark's skulls, a pulse meant to trigger aggression, to override instinct and force response. And for a brief moment the instruments flickered faintly, a ripple of electromagnetic noise passing through the water, but instead of surging upward.
The wardens did not understand the stillness, and because they did not understand it, they dismissed it as delay rather than defiance, turning their attention back to the humans on the platform, confident that fear would return once the display was complete. And it was then that they noticed the boy standing at the edge of the ring, small and barefoot against the vast metal structure, his clothes faded and salt-stained, his posture calm in a way that felt wrong in a place built entirely to break spirits. His name was Evan, though the wardens did not care to learn it, only noting him as a juvenile non-combatant, a category they usually ignored because children were easy to control through hunger and exhaustion alone. Yet this one had been observed repeatedly kneeling near the same section of the platform each cycle, speaking softly toward the water as if it could hear him. At first the guards had laughed, recording the behavior as a harmless coping ritual, but over time a pattern emerged that even the wardens could not ignore, because every time the boy came to the edge, one of the sentry sharks would rise from the depths, not aggressively, not in a feeding spiral, but slowly, cautiously, its massive shadow resolving into the shape of a juvenile specimen, marked by an uneven dorsal scar, the result of a damaged implant or an old net, no one was certain. The shark never breached the surface fully, never showed teeth, never accelerated. It simply stayed beneath the water directly below the boy, hovering as if listening. And the humans noticed long before the aliens did, whispering among themselves that the shark had stopped responding to command pulses whenever the boy was present, that its movement patterns no longer matched the rest of the sentries. The wardens eventually took interest, not out of curiosity but irritation, because anomalies meant loss of control, and loss of control was the one thing their empire did not tolerate. On the fourth cycle after the silence, the warden himself descended from the command ring, his armor reflecting the pale sky, his steps heavy and deliberate as he approached the edge where Evan knelt, and the humans around them froze, sensing instinctively that something irreversible was about to happen. The warden stared down at the water, at the faint shadow moving just below the surface, and then back at the boy, his expression unreadable. "This creature responds to you," he said through the translator, his voice smooth and cold. Evan did not look away from the water. "He's not dangerous," the boy replied quietly, his hand resting on the metal railing, fingers relaxed, not gripping, and that calm was what finally broke the warden's patience, because fear was expected here, submission was expected, but calm in the presence of power was an insult. The warden gestured, and a guard raised a plasma lance, the weapon humming softly as it charged, the sound sharp enough to make several humans flinch, and finally Evan looked up, his eyes widening just slightly. "Please," he said, and it was not a demand or a challenge, only a simple word spoken with the assumption that it would be understood. But the warden smiled then, a thin, deliberate expression meant to teach a lesson, because empires were built on moments like this, moments where mercy was withheld publicly, so obedience could spread privately. "You mistake ownership for companionship," the warden said. "The ocean belongs to us. Everything in it answers to us." He raised his hand, and before anyone could move, before anyone could shout, the plasma lance fired, the bolt striking the water just beneath the surface where the shadow lingered, releasing a burst of steam and light that washed over the platform in heat and glare.
When the water cleared, the shark floated upward, its massive body suddenly weightless, its bioluminescent veins flickering and fading, the crooked scar along its fin visible as it rolled slightly with the gentle motion of the sea, and a thin line of blood spread outward, blooming quietly in the water. A collective breath was held across the platform. Someone sobbed. Evan did not move. He stood very still, staring down at the body of the shark as it drifted, his face pale but composed, as if he were memorizing something rather than reacting to it. The Wardens waited for the ocean to respond, waited for chaos, for feeding frenzies, for the sharks to surge upward in violent competition, but again the water remained calm. And beneath the surface, the remaining sentries began to descend, their lights dimming as they withdrew into the depths, leaving the dead juvenile shark alone near the surface, like an offering that had been refused. Confusion rippled through the alien ranks, irritation sharpening into anger, because the display had failed twice now, and failure in front of prisoners was unacceptable. "Observe," the warden said coldly, gesturing toward the drifting body. "This is what happens to attachments." Evan finally spoke again, his voice steady but lower than before, carrying a weight that made several humans lift their heads. "He stayed because he chose to," the boy said. The warden laughed. "Creatures do not choose, they respond to control." Evan shook his head slowly and looked up at the warden, meeting his gaze without fear, and when he spoke next, the words were so quiet that the translator hesitated before rendering them aloud, as if even the machine sensed something wrong. "You shouldn't have done that," Evan said. The sentence was simple, almost gentle, but as it echoed across the platform, the air seemed to change, a subtle pressure settling in, and the humans felt it immediately, a tightening in the chest, a shift in awareness, while the Wardens felt something they could not quantify, a sudden inexplicable unease, as if the ocean beneath them had just taken notice of their existence in a way that it had not before. The water darkened, not with movement but with depth, currents subtly altering around the platform, and far below, beyond the reach of scanners, massive shapes began to turn, their movements slow and synchronized, drawn not by hunger, but something older, something quieter, something that did not rush, and as the body of the juvenile shark finally slipped beneath the surface and vanished into the blue, the Wardens realized too late that they had not just destroyed a weapon, they had crossed a boundary.
The Wardens decided to correct the anomaly the way they corrected all things that challenged their authority, not with investigation or understanding, but with demonstration, because empires that rule through fear cannot allow exceptions to exist in plain sight, and the boy at the edge of the platform had become exactly that. They told themselves the humans were projecting meaning where none existed, that the shark's behavior was nothing more than a malfunctioning control implant and a juvenile neural pattern insufficiently hardened by conditioning. And in doing so, they convinced themselves that eliminating the variable would restore order, never considering that the variable was not the creature, but the relationship. On the cycle they chose, the sky was flat and pale, the sea unusually calm, its surface stretched smooth as glass beneath the platform, as if deliberately concealing its depth, and the humans felt the shift before any command was issued, a tension spreading through the ring as guards were positioned more densely along the edge, weapons powered but not yet raised. Evan was brought forward under the pretense of routine relocation, his hands unbound, his expression unreadable, and when he knelt, as he always did, the humans understood too late that this was not a coincidence, but a stage. The juvenile shark rose on cue, its familiar glow blooming beneath the water, and for a moment the Wardens watched in silence, recording data, noting the creature's reduced aggression, its failure to respond to recall pulses, its continued proximity to the boy, and their irritation hardened into certainty. This, they decided, would be the moment they reasserted control. Without warning,
Without ceremony, the warden overseeing the platform raised a single clawed hand, and a plasma lance discharged into the water, the bolt striking with surgical precision just beneath the shark's head, releasing a violent bloom of steam and light that rippled outward and washed heat across the platform. The humans gasped as one. Evan did not scream. The shark convulsed once, its massive body shuddering as the glow in its veins flickered erratically, then dimmed, then went out entirely. And as it floated upward, weightless and wrong, its scarred fin breaking the surface, the ocean did not surge or churn or erupt into the chaos the wardens expected. Instead, it went still, unnaturally still. The remaining sentry sharks did not rise in response. They did not circle or feed or compete. They descended. One by one, their lights dimmed and vanished into the depths, as if retreating from something unseen, leaving the dead juvenile alone near the surface, a silent accusation drifting in open water. Confusion rippled through the alien ranks, irritation sharpening into unease, because this was not how controlled ecosystems behaved, and for the first time, the wardens were forced to acknowledge that the ocean was not responding to their commands at all. Evan stood slowly, his hands clenched at his sides, his gaze fixed on the lifeless form below, and when he spoke, his voice was steady but heavy, carrying across the platform without effort. He did not threaten. He did not plead, he simply stated a truth they had failed to consider. The words themselves were unremarkable, but the intent behind them carried weight, and as they echoed across the ring, something in the environment shifted, subtle at first, then undeniable. The water darkened, not with blood or motion, but with depth, currents altering in ways the sensors struggled to interpret, pressure gradients forming and collapsing beneath the platform in slow, deliberate patterns. Far below, beyond the reach of scanners and control signals, ancient shapes began to turn, massive bodies adjusting course as if responding to a call that was not a sound, but a recognition, something older than implants and stronger than fear. The wardens felt it then, a sensation they had no language for, an awareness pressing upward from the deep, patient and vast, not angry, not rushed, but attentive. And for the first time since they had conquered this ocean world, they understood that they had misidentified what they were ruling. They had believed the sea was a resource, a weapon, a territory to be segmented and controlled, and the creatures within it nothing more than tools shaped by force. But in killing the shark in front of the boy, they had not demonstrated power, they had revealed ignorance. They had mistaken obedience for loyalty, silence for emptiness, and depth for absence. And as the dead juvenile finally slipped beneath the surface and vanished from sight, swallowed gently by the same water it had risen from, the wardens realized, too late, that the ocean had been watching the entire time, and now, at last, it was paying attention. The platform shivered ever so slightly, not from wind or current, not from machinery or footfalls, but from the weight of expectation that hung heavier than metal, and for a long, impossible stretch, nothing moved. The humans froze, the guards froze, even the wardens, who had never known hesitation, felt an unfamiliar hesitation press into their bones, as if the ocean itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting. And in that pause, every sound seemed magnified and hollow, from the soft creak of the railings to the distant, muffled pulse of life below the surface, a vibration too deep to be felt, but impossible to ignore, a reminder that something vast and patient was stirring beneath, something that had no reason to hurry and no need to strike immediately, because it had already won the first part of the battle by making its presence felt. Evan stood at the edge, small and still, his eyes scanning the endless blue, his chest rising and falling slowly, deliberately, and the humans around him followed his rhythm, as if his calm could anchor them in a storm they did not yet understand, while the warden's confidence eroded incrementally, their sensors blinking and recalibrating, struggling to detect what was there and what was not, and the juveniles in the crowd, children who had spent weeks staring at metal and water, began to mimic Evan's stance, feet planted, hands relaxed, shoulders squared, staring at the place where the ocean had chosen to withhold its response, and the stillness became a tangible weight pressing down on everyone, the kind of silence that is alive, aware, patient, deliberate, and ancient. Above the water, the sun, or the pale simulation of it, reflected across the platform in fractured glints, the metal glowing faintly, highlighting small details, rust along the joints, scratches etched into the handrails, the faint sheen of salt on human skin, the way a guard's fingers twitched unconsciously toward the trigger of a weapon he did not fully trust. And beneath, the ocean lay flat and dark, hiding immense shadows that moved slowly with purpose, like predators adjusting to prey they had already deemed harmless enough to study first, the kind of predators that did not strike out of hunger or instinct, but out of understanding. And in that understanding lay the reckoning that the Wardens could neither measure nor control. Minutes stretched and folded themselves, the rhythm of the platform becoming discordant, hearts beating in uneven patterns, the sound of breathing suddenly loud enough to echo in the mind, and the humans began to feel something they had not allowed themselves to hope for. Not freedom, not safety, not vengeance, but a recognition that they were part of a system far older, more intelligent, and infinitely more patient than the one designed to oppress them. The dead juvenile shark, carried gently into the depths by currents invisible to eyes and sensors alike, had become a signal, a warning, a declaration, and far below, larger forms began to turn, massive arcs of mass and light moving with grace impossible to calculate, invisible to the instruments that had once dominated this ocean world, unbound by pulsed commands or implanted chips, and the Wardens shifted uneasily, sensing something was wrong but unable to define it, their empire's certainty crumbling like sand under wave pressure, because the tools they had trusted for control had no jurisdiction here. Evan stood motionless at the edge, his gaze unwavering, and in that stillness, the humans around him understood that fear was no longer the correct response. Wonder, awe, and instinctive respect rose to replace it, primal and precise, because what they were witnessing was neither attack nor retreat, but consideration, judgment, a calculation that was beyond anger and beyond mercy. The ocean was conscious, and it had chosen to pause before delivering its lesson. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint scent of brine and something older, deeper, a smell that the humans recognized as life itself, and even the Wardens felt it brush past them in a way that rattled the deepest nerves, something beyond terror, beyond anticipation, something that carried the weight of millennia spent perfecting predator and prey, survival and protection, silence and patience, and the entire platform seemed to lean forward on the edge of comprehension, everyone caught between the mundane and the infinite, a razor-thin line of reality suspended over the depths. The remaining sharks did not rise, the ocean did not swell, the currents remained deceptively calm, but the tension in the water was palpable, the kind of tension that spoke louder than teeth or claws, louder than any human or alien voice could convey, because the stillness itself was alive, breathing, waiting, and each human on the platform, from the oldest scientist to the smallest child, felt the truth in their chest before it could be spoken. They were no longer merely captives or observers. They were participants in a pact older than technology, older than the...
The water shifted beneath the platform as if something immense had taken a deep, deliberate breath, the currents rolling in waves too subtle to be felt by humans, but enough to vibrate through the metal supports, carrying a warning that was both invisible and undeniable. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, a faint outline began to form deep below, a shadow so massive it warped the light, stretching longer and wider than any shark or whale should ever be, moving with a precision and patience that defied instinct, its every motion deliberate and careful, as though it had studied this small ring of human prisoners and alien Wardens for centuries before making a decision. Evan knelt at the edge as always, watching, and the humans behind him instinctively froze, understanding the moment without a word, because the ocean had a language older than any empire, and they had begun to hear it. The wardens barked orders, their voices brittle and sharp, but even as guards scrambled to raise weapons, the water itself seemed to respond with a low, resonant pulse, not loud, not violent, but a vibration that shook metal and bone in tandem, a prelude to something immense that could not be controlled, overridden, or stopped. And the juvenile shark, once a singular anomaly, now returned silently, circling beneath the platform with measured grace, its body a reminder of what had already been tested and survived, guiding the humans into a rhythm they could not yet understand fully. Then the first strike came, not through teeth, not through speed, but through environment. A massive column of water rose abruptly beneath the platform, hurling guards and machinery into chaotic arcs, splashing against reinforced steel and causing the sensors to fail as alarms screamed and blared, the warden's carefully constructed control grid collapsing in real time, and all the while the humans did not panic, did not scream, because Evan had taught them the rhythm, and the shadow below waited, patient and immense, observing their responses, judging which humans were ready to survive this trial and which were not, every movement deliberate, almost ceremonial, the ocean itself an ancient teacher, and they its students. With a single, almost imperceptible gesture of his small hand, Evan signaled, and the humans began to move with cautious precision, using the chaos to their advantage, ducking behind bent metal and fallen scaffolding, drawing improvised tools and devices, while the wardens struggled to maintain cohesion, their empire's certainty dissolving as structures they trusted failed one by one under the relentless, intelligent pressure of the ocean's guardians. Below, the shadow moved with an elegance that made the violence seem purposeful rather than random, nudging debris, redirecting currents, shifting water columns like invisible hands manipulating chess pieces, and the juvenile shark now joined in coordinated motions, not attacking but assisting, herding, guiding, signaling in ways the humans could feel rather than see, a partnership forming instantly and irrevocably, a silent understanding that the humans were no longer prey, but allies in an intricate strategy centuries in the making. The platform quaked as a secondary wave lifted one end several feet, sending a cascade of water rushing across floors, knocking alien weapons into piles and forcing the wardens to clutch at railings or be swept aside. And even the largest of the sea hunters, trained to dominate and annihilate, faltered at the sudden loss of control, their instincts failing against the patient intelligence beneath, because no algorithm, no weapon, no implanted control pulse could match the natural cunning and tactical precision that the ocean had honed over millennia. Evan's eyes were locked on the shadow, and the humans mirrored his focus, every breath measured, every movement deliberate, not out of fear, but out of trust that the ocean knew what it was doing, that it had already decided the rules, and the wardens, for all their size and power, were being forced into a defensive dance they did not understand, reacting to forces that were both everywhere and nowhere, moving like ghosts through currents they could not see and patterns they could not predict. The juvenile shark brushed past debris, signaling with flicks of its tail and subtle undulations, while the massive shadow below shifted closer to the platform, the water vibrating with a tone that was nearly audible, a deep, resonant hum that pressed on the chest, a sound that humans instinctively recognized as both warning and protector. And as the next series of tidal surges lifted panels, shattered containment cells, and washed away the warden's artificial boundaries, Evan slowly rose to his feet, small and unassuming against the chaos, yet central to it, the humans following his lead, their movements synchronized not by training, but by instinct and the invisible hand of the ocean. And in that moment, the wardens realized the full scope of their mistake. They had thought that punishment could bend the water, break the bond, extinguish the connection between human and sea, and now, witnessing the platform platform heave and the abyss respond with intelligence and force, they understood that the ocean did not obey, it chose, it acted, and it had chosen the humans, that small boy, and the guardians that had always watched silently from the depths as the rightful masters of the day. The silence after the first strikes now stretched, filled not with fear, but with awareness, the humans' calm mirrored by the steady, deliberate movement of massive shapes below, the Wardens' panic growing with each pulse of water and each displaced wave, and for the first time in their lives they felt small, helpless, and utterly unprepared for the reckoning that the ocean had been waiting centuries to deliver, and as Evan extended a hand, the juvenile shark and the shadow beneath responded in perfect synchrony, guiding the humans safely through the first phase of destruction, the ocean itself demonstrating the power of patience, intelligence, and instinct, teaching in a language older than empire, and the platform, trembling and broken, became a stage upon which the humans finally realized the truth. Strength is not measured in size or weapons, it is measured in understanding, unity, and the bonds that reach deeper than metal, deeper than fear, deeper than the surface of the endless waiting sea. The ocean surged beneath the fractured platform like a living entity awakened, currents twisting and spiraling with intent, lifting panels, throwing waves over armored aliens, and revealing in stark, brutal clarity that every inch of water, every shadow, every pulse belonged not to the Empire, but to a force far older, far patient, and infinitely more cunning. And as Evan led the humans toward the edge, their feet slipping slightly on slick metal, the juvenile shark darted beneath them like a streak of phosphorescent light, nudging debris, guiding currents, protecting their movements with uncanny precision, while the massive shadow below mirrored every motion, rising in slow arcs, its enormous eyes reflecting the chaos on the platform and the panic in the Wardens' faces. And for the first time, the aliens realized that the environment itself had become an ally to the humans, turning every footstep, every misstep, every breath into advantage for those who had learned to respect the sea rather than dominate it. The Wardens barked orders, voices hoarse from exertion and fear, trying to marshal their forces, to bring the humans under control, to raise weapons and impose rules that no longer applied, but their signals were lost amid the roar of displaced water, the shattering of panels, the cries of guards swept aside by currents they had not accounted for, and the humans moved in perfect synchrony, instinct and observation guiding their every step, their eyes following Evan, their ears attuned to the subtle shifts in water, the vibrations and echoes that told them where the massive shapes lurked, where the platforms were weakest, and where the Wardens had overcommitted, unaware that every decision they made played directly into the ocean's design. A surge lifted one side of the platform violently, tossing an elite guard into the open, a scream swallowed by the sudden wall of water, while the humans below ducked instinctively, using bent scaffolding for cover, improvising weapons from debris, knives and rods and scrap metal, all guided by the currents and the subtle nudges of the juvenile shark, which circled and darted and flashed like a living signal in the chaos, her luminous body drawing attention just long enough for the humans to act, for them to strike and retreat, for them to survive, and above them the massive shadow continued to twist and coil in deliberate arcs, shaping the environment with intelligence, a predator that did not need to rush because time itself bent to its patience. Every movement of the humans became a lesson in adaptation, in silent coordination, in learning to use the water as ally and the shadows as shield, while the Wardens faltered, their rigid formations collapsing under pressure they could not anticipate, their overconfidence, their reliance on technology and brute strength meaningless in the face of a force that acted through instinct, intelligence, and centuries of evolution perfected far beyond their comprehension.
Evan's eyes were locked on the shadow, and the humans mirrored his focus, every breath measured, every movement deliberate, not out of fear, but out of trust that the ocean knew what it was doing, that it had already decided the rules, and the Wardens, for all their size and power, were being forced into a defensive dance they did not understand, reacting to forces that were both everywhere and nowhere, moving like ghosts through currents they could not see and patterns they could not predict. The juvenile shark brushed past debris, signaling with flicks of its tail and subtle undulations, while the massive shadow below shifted closer to the platform, the water vibrating with it.
The Warden's shouts became meaningless echoes swallowed by the roar of water and the groaning metal beneath their feet as the humans advanced with a calm, deadly purpose, each step precise, each motion synchronized with the rhythm of the currents and the subtle nudges of the juvenile shark, who now darted like living lightning through the chaos, weaving between enormous legs, brushing past guards' armor to confuse and disorient. While beneath the platform, the massive shadow moved with a deliberate, slow intelligence, redirecting water, creating waves that forced armored aliens off balance, flipping weapons into the depths, and pressing the humans forward with invisible hands, guiding them toward the central command, where the Wardens had thought their control unassailable. Panic rippled through their ranks as one by one their formations failed, and every attempt to fire, to regroup, to signal reinforcements was countered by the environment itself, a combination of human ingenuity and oceanic precision that no empire could anticipate, their arrogance dissolving as the first elite guards were lifted, swept and pinned by the currents, or thrown into precarious gaps, their weapons clattering uselessly, their armor providing nothing against the intelligent forces around them. Evan moved with quiet authority, small hands gesturing, eyes locked on the approaching central hub, and the humans followed instinctively, reading currents, observing shadows, interpreting every movement of the juvenile shark and the unseen leviathan as signals, adapting with every step, their fear replaced by focus, their desperation replaced by understanding, while the Wardens realized too late that they were no longer predators but prey, trapped on a collapsing stage designed by the ocean itself and performed by the humans who had learned to read its rhythm. The juvenile shark darted upward, nudging a guard into a heap of twisted metal, and the shadow below rose, lifting the platform slightly to redirect the force of a falling barricade, creating space for the humans to advance, a precise manipulation that seemed supernatural, impossible, yet entirely real, demonstrating the intelligence of the deep and the bond between species, while Wardens scrambled, shouting orders, swinging weapons blindly, only to find their attacks deflected by water, debris, or the perfectly timed motions of the humans who had learned to move like the ocean, flowing with force rather than resisting it, striking only when opportunity allowed, exploiting the chaos to reclaim authority. Panels ripped from the platform flew in arcs, catching several Wardens who had been overconfident, and they fell with crushing inevitability into the shallows below, their screams muted by water and metal, while others attempted to regroup near the command center, only to find themselves blocked by currents manipulated by the shadow, or surrounded by humans armed with improvised tools, knives, rods, and shattered equipment, their small size now irrelevant against coordination, intelligence, and patience. And as Evan's hand signaled a leftward advance, the juvenile shark surged ahead, pushing water to create a temporary shield, deflecting debris and blinding sensors, while the humans moved under this protection like a single organism, a wave of living will and instinct, unstoppable because they were connected not only to each other, but to the guardians of the deep who had chosen them.
The largest of the Wardens, a brute who had crushed hundreds of humans without thought, suddenly found himself unsteady as currents swirled around him unpredictably, water whipping through open gaps, panels swinging like hammers, and with a coordinated shove from two humans and the subtle push of the juvenile shark's tail, he toppled, armor clanging, weapon lost, into a cascading pile of metal below, a symbol of the complete inversion of power, where intellect, instinct, and bond outweighed brute force. Above, the remaining Wardens fought desperately, but every action they took was anticipated, countered, and redirected, the humans now acting as extensions of the ocean's will, guided by Evan and the subtle nudges of the juvenile shark, whose luminous body flashed across the battlefield like lightning, signaling where to move, where to strike, and where to survive, while the Leviathan beneath manipulated water columns with imperceptible arcs, displacing pressure, pushing debris, creating barriers, and guiding currents so perfectly that the Wardens were left helpless, their empire crumbling not under guns or bombs, but under strategy, understanding, and the coordination of species who had learned to respect each other. The central command doors loomed ahead, a fortress of metal and arrogance, but the humans approached with perfect timing, using the currents as cover, diving behind fallen scaffolding, and finally, Evan stepped forward, small but unyielding, placing his hand on the control panel as the juvenile shark brushed against the edge of the doorway, guiding the final strike. The doors groaned, metal bending under the coordinated pressure of water and hands, and as they slid open, the remaining Wardens froze, realizing that their dominion was gone, their power irrelevant, their empire's pride shattered, because they had forgotten the oldest law of all. Strength without respect is fragile, and bonds, once awakened, can move forces older and larger than any empire. In that moment, as humans flooded the command center, pushing aside the remaining Wardens who had no answer to the intelligence and coordination before them, the ocean beneath and around the platform pulsed once, a deep, resonant vibration that was both acknowledgement and warning, and every human present felt it, the pulse of the deep, the heartbeat of a world older than conquest, and for the first time, the Wardens saw clearly the cost of underestimating humans, the cost of breaking bonds that had existed for millennia, the realization that they were not invincible, and the ocean had chosen its guardians, humans who understood, adapted, and survived, and creatures who had protected them silently, patiently, and now with purpose. And in that final, overwhelming moment, the Warden's fear was complete, absolute, and the reckoning was done, not with fire or bloodshed, but with understanding, respect, and the unstoppable force of life that moves beneath the waves. The platform now belonged to the humans, not by size, not by weapons, but by understanding, adaptation, and the bond that had been forged between them and the guardians of the deep. As Evan moved through the command area with calm authority, every motion deliberate, while the juvenile shark circled, luminous streaks in the chaotic water, marking paths, signaling where debris could be used as cover, where pressure points could be exploited, and beneath it all, the shadow from the depths rose partially into view, massive eyes observing, calculating, teaching, a force so old that time itself seemed to bend around it, and with each coordinated movement, the humans secured the remaining control stations, disabled the Warden's weapon arrays, and forced their elite soldiers into retreat or surrender, the water itself moving like a living ally, currents shifting violently to block pathways, redirect projectiles, and create channels that only the humans could navigate safely, while the juveniles of the ocean's guardians, smaller sharks, and swarms of swift, luminous fish swept through the lower decks, clearing corridors, disorienting the Wardens, and ensuring that every corner of the platform was under the influence of forces the aliens could not comprehend, their arrogance shattered with every step as they realized that this was not a battle of strength, but of intelligence, patience, and unity, And as Evan gestured, humans moved in perfect synchrony, following currents, reading subtle changes in pressure, interpreting the flickers of light from the juvenile shark and the swirls of water around the shadow below as instructions, striking only when opportunity arose, never wasting energy, never exposing themselves to unnecessary danger. And the Wardens, those massive, armored enforcers who once ruled without question, now fled or fell, their pride destroyed, their empire irrelevant, as the humans reclaimed each station, each panel, and each corner of the platform, the ocean guiding them like a silent, patient general who had been preparing for centuries for the moment that mortals could finally rise to its expectations. One by one, the alien soldiers were neutralized without a single human lost, not because they were stronger, but because they had learned to move with forces far beyond comprehension, reading currents, pressure, shadows, and even the subtle vibration of metal to anticipate danger, while the juvenile shark darted forward to block, her body a flash of phosphorescent warning, nudging obstacles into precise positions, and the massive shadow beneath lifted partially to create a powerful updraft that washed several Wardens into pools of water-filled containment zones, their screams muted, their weapons useless, and the humans advanced steadily, methodically, as if choreographed by the ocean itself. And as the command center lights flickered under the influence of displaced currents and damaged circuits, Evan reached the central control terminal, his small hands moving across buttons, levers, and panels, overriding locks, disabling communications, and bringing every system under human command, while the juvenile shark circled around the central hub, her movements precise, almost ceremonial, as if acknowledging that the humans had now truly earned dominion